Dan Quinn. Welcome aboard to Washington, D.C., aka the nation's capital. You have just been hired by the Washington Commanders. Wow, talk about moving on from your plans quickly in the coaching cycle. This is Sports Guy talking that you guys are watching and listening to. I am Dustin Tran, your host, as I am here today to talk about Dan Quinn getting hired by the Commanders, as this hire has been considered to be underwhelming for the organization. Dan Quinn has been the defensive coordinator for an elite Cowboys defense the past 3 seasons, and he was a former head coach for the Falcons. The Commanders moved on from head coach Ron Rivera, as that hire was made under their previous owner, Dan Snyder. Before I say anything else though, I want to present you guys with a topic question. So here it is. Did the Commanders make the right choice hiring Dan Quinn? Honestly, this was the best hire the Commanders could have made, because the Commanders were trying to go all in on Ben Johnson. Obviously, we know about the offensive wizardry of Ben Johnson. He has been an amazing offensive coordinator for the Detroit Lions the past 2 seasons. He turned around Jared Goff's NFL career. He got Jahmyr Gibbs to play some of his best football. He was one of the better rookies in the National Football League. David Montgomery did a great job running the football for the Detroit Lions, and he did a good job putting guys like Sam Laporta and Amon-Ra St. Brown in positions for success. He also got Jameson Williams going in the receiving game. So you look at what the Detroit Lions were able to build offensively. Ben Johnson played a tremendous role in the success of the Lions. You also have to remember that the Lions have an excellent offensive line, so Ben Johnson understood how to use his personnel really well. And this Washington Commanders offense has talent. Yes, I know that their talent didn't play up to their record this year, but they do have talent on offense. They've got Sam Howell, who I believe is going to be one of the better quarterbacks in the National Football League. I don't think they need to be moving on from Sam Howell at all. He was leading the NFL in passing yards for 2/3 of the season. It's just that he had a bad offensive line. That's kind of why his play fell off towards the end of the year. But I think Sam Howell is going to be a fine quarterback in the National Football League. Of course, they've got Brian Robinson Jr. He can run the football pretty effectively as well. And they've got Terry McLaurin, who's gotten 1,000 yards receiving in 4 straight seasons. And of course, they've got Jahan Dotson. I know that he struggled this past year, but I still got hope for him because he did have a pretty good rookie year under Scott Turner as the offensive coordinator. He just needs to learn how not to drop the football, and he'll be a good player. So obviously, you look at the Commanders roster, you were thinking, okay, Ben Johnson is probably going to take that job because they got a lot of pieces to work with on offense, and he does have a relationship with Sam Howell in the past. Obviously, Ben Johnson did not end up taking that job though, because he wanted to finish the job in Detroit, and he believes he can win a Super Bowl with the Lions. Talk about loyalty for Ben Johnson. I don't agree with that decision from Ben Johnson, but I can respect it. So obviously, they tried to put all their egg baskets on him. Didn't work out, obviously. And then of course there was Bobby Slowick. They tried to get him, but Bobby Slowick, he ends up getting a pay raise in Houston. I guess Bobby Slowick, he doesn't feel like he can be a head coach yet in the National Football League. So the Commanders, they couldn't go after Bobby Slowick. And then they tried to get Mike Macdonald, but by that time that they were focusing on Mike Macdonald, he was already on a plane to Seattle. And then Seattle gave him a deal that was too good to pass up. Anytime anybody offers you a 6-year contract as a first-time head coach, you're going to take that deal 10 times out of 10. So the Commanders were left scrambling for options. Obviously, you don't want to hire a retread like Bill Belichick because he's going to want personnel control. You also don't want to go after Mike Vrabel either. I've heard some people say, oh, why didn't the Commanders go after Mike Vrabel? Well, he wants personnel control too. And obviously, the Commanders just hired a new general manager. I doubt the first-time general manager is going to want to hand over power to a former head coach. So they had to go after a retread that wasn't going to ask for personnel decisions. Obviously, a guy like Jim Harbaugh was not available on the market, and getting Pete Carroll, well, he's just simply too old to be coaching football at this point, so they had to settle for Dan Quinn. What were the alternative options anyway? Get Aaron Glenn, defensive coordinator of the Detroit Lions. No thanks, I'm not hiring Aaron Glenn. And then of course there was Anthony Weaver. Seems like he was a very good position coach for the Baltimore Ravens, but he hasn't even called plays for a defense yet, so how could you possibly even hire him? And then of course the dark horse candidate that I thought could have came into play was Eric Bieniemy. He was the offensive coordinator for the Commanders this past season, but the players, they didn't like Bieniemy. I guess that's why they didn't go with him. So I mean, Dan Quinn, he was the best possible hire they could have gone with. There were not a lot of great options out there on the market that were willing to take the Commanders job. I know a lot of people in Washington are angry that Dan Quinn got hired by them, but to be honest, the options just were not available. The other options were not willing to work for Washington or for other NFL franchises for various reasons. And when you think about this Dan Quinn hiring, it's actually a solid hire. Look, I'm not going to promise you that the Washington Commanders are going to win Super Bowls finals or that they're even going to be major contenders in the NFC. But you have to think about how they didn't have a lot of options to work with. At least they're getting a player's coach. At least they're getting a guy that cares about his players and that he is a good culture builder. I understand that they had that in Ron Rivera as well, but it was pretty clear that Ron Rivera had quit on the Washington Commanders this past year, especially during the middle stretch of the year. He was basically mailing it in. He was giving half effort. He just was not going all in terms of trying to win games for the Washington Commanders. Obviously, I was high on the Commanders this past year. It didn't work out for various reasons. Even though Sam Howell did have a solid year as the starter on the Commanders, it just did not materialize to anything more than just that. You look at how the Washington Commanders defense regressed big time, and you look at how the offensive line was putrid for them. I mean, Sam Howell was getting pressured on screens. Anytime a quarterback is getting pressured on screen passes, that's how you know your offensive line is horrible. Obviously, if you're the Washington Commanders, you don't need to be taking a quarterback with the second overall pick. You need to be getting an offensive lineman somewhere in the draft, or maybe take Marvin Harrison Jr. because you look at this Commanders team, you're thinking, well, Sam Howell definitely isn't the problem. I don't know how people can be watching Sam Howell and the Commanders and think, oh yeah, Sam Howell's the problem. No, Sam Howell is one of the bright spots on the Washington Commanders. If Sam Howell didn't play for the Commanders and they just plug in a below average quarterback, they're winning 2 games the entire season. All right, so you look at how the Commanders, they have bigger problems to worry about than quarterback, and they need to get a guy that's going to settle down the culture, that's going to get players to play hard for him, and more importantly, they need somebody that can fix up the defense. The Washington Commanders had the worst defense this past season, which should not even be the case at all, because you look at all that talent on defense. I know they traded away Chase Young and Montez Sweat during the season last year, but that team still has talent defensively. I mean, you got a roster on defense that is filled with Deron Payne, Jonathan Allen. You've got Emmanuel Forrest, who did struggle his rookie year, but he was a good player in college. And then you've got Cam Curl. He's a solid safety. I mean, look, Dan Quinn is going to be able to get the most out of his defensive units. He is a good defensive-minded coach. The problem with Dan Quinn is, can he hire a rock star offensive coordinator? I believe he can, though. If I'm Dan Quinn, I'm hiring Clint Kubiak. He is a member of the San Francisco 49ers coaching staff. He's an assistant over there. They need to hire that guy to be their offensive coordinator and build around Sam Howell. But anyways, though, when you talk about Dan Quinn, he's going to be a guy that's going to set the tone, and he's going to get players to play hard for him. And more importantly, I think the real reason why the Washington Commanders settled for Dan Quinn was because they were thinking, okay, we can't get a good coach, at least let's make the Cowboys worse, because we all know that Dan Quinn played a major role in the turnaround of the Cowboys defense. So why not try to weaken your biggest division rival on defense and try to make sure that our defense gets better from his presence? So I think the Commanders, they're thinking they want to get a strong leader in the building that's going to get players to play hard for him, and they're going to try to get better on defense. I know this wasn't their plan A. Heck, it wasn't even their plan B or their plan C, but this was the best possible option they could have gotten at this point in juncture of time, because guys like Ben Johnson, Bobby Slowick, and Mike McDonald, they just simply didn't want to come to Washington. So they had to go get Dan Quinn, and I think Dan Quinn is a solid hire. I don't think that there's a lot of candidates better than Dan Quinn in terms of experience. I mean, Dan Quinn, he did take the Falcons to a Super Bowl, so that has to count for something. And the Atlanta Falcons had an MVP quarterback in Matt Ryan, yes, and they did have a rockstar offensive coordinator in Kyle Shanahan. But my point is, the Atlanta Falcons were not this great roster that was filled with a super team year in and year out under the Dan Quinn era. You obviously look at how the Falcons have been a mess since Dan Quinn left. You look at how the Atlanta Falcons have not even really been all that competitive since he has been fired by them. So I'm saying that Dan Quinn, he's going to make the Commanders competitive sooner rather than later. I'm hearing people are complaining that, oh, Dan Quinn, he's a career 500 record as a head coach, but if he gives those results on the Commanders, let's be honest, guys, that's probably going to be the best era they've had in the last 25 years. If I'm the Commanders, I'm definitely signing up for mediocrity. Look, I'm not saying to settle for mediocrity, but if the Commanders end up being mediocre during the Dan Quinn era and they don't have any bad seasons at all like Ron Rivera this past year, then yeah, they're going to have to go ahead and accept that. That's the real reason why they did that. And I think the general manager, they're going to want to supply Dan Quinn with good players. I've always felt like Dan Quinn would be a good coach if you gave him good players on defense. If you just gave him a defense that fit to his personnel, he would always get the most out of the defensive unit. And then on offense, if you give him a good offensive coordinator with a good coaching staff around him, he's going to look like a good coach. That's always how I've kind of felt about Dan Quinn, and I think he can do that on the Commanders. Obviously, I don't really love the hire for Dan Quinn, but I think that it is a decent hire. I don't think it's as bad as what everybody is saying. I think it's like a C- kind of hire or a C-level hiring. It's the best they could have done. It's obviously uninspiring though, because they were trying to get better candidates. But look, they wanted a head coach that was a great leader, that didn't want personnel control, and Dan Quinn was the best that they could have done. They tried to get Ben Johnson, they tried to get Bobby Slowick, they tried to get Mike McDonald. It just didn't work out. I mean, what was the alternative? name Eric Bieniemy, the head coach, a guy that a lot of players did not like. I know Eric Bieniemy has put up good results in the past as a former offensive coordinator for the Kansas City Chiefs, but one could say that was because of Patrick Mahomes. I'm not saying that I'm believing that, but I'm saying that is a case that some of these owners and front office executives are thinking, and that on the Commanders, there were some players that did not like Eric Bieniemy at all. And when you coach players in today's NFL, you want a coach that players rally to and really like, and Eric Bieniemy just didn't have that in him. I'm not saying that Eric Bieniemy didn't deserve it, but what I am saying about Eric Bieniemy is that maybe he lost out this job to Dan Quinn because of the fact that Dan Quinn was a player's coach while Eric Bieniemy was not. And I think the Commanders were looking for a player's coach. They wanted a guy that players could relate to really well while having high levels of energy. That describes Dan Quinn perfectly. He is a great motivator of men. He's going to be animated on the sidelines. He's going to be a lot of fun to watch in terms of seeing his sideline reactions. He's not going to stand there like a frozen statue. And that if you give him the right personnel on defense, he's going to be really good on defense as far as coaching up the defensive side of the field for the Commanders. So that's why hiring Dan Quinn was not necessarily the worst choice in the world, even though I can understand why people are getting mad about the Commanders hiring Dan Quinn. Remember, go ahead and subscribe to Sports Guy Talking, like the video, and please comment down below. If you guys do that, I may shout you guys out in my Instagram story every Monday. That'll be for the @Dustin Instagram account. Make sure to follow me on Instagram @Dustin Tran and @Sports Guy Talking. Also, go follow me on Twitter @Dustin Tran. Again, go ahead and do those things that I just told you guys to go do. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed the content that was just produced. Peace out. I hope you enjoyed that video. Want more Sports Guy Talking, the home of great sports content? Make sure you click that subscribe button to get the latest from Sports Guy Talking. Go ahead and like the video, comment down below, check the description box on the video in order to follow my Instagram and Twitter. Also, be sure to check out more of the best clips from the YouTube channel, Sports Guy Talking.